attention, please. I think we will get started. There's a few people left in line. So welcome to the Community Learning Series. This has been a long time in the making. Alex and I have been talking about this for several months. And there are several members of the SMU community who actually been Peace Corps volunteers. And we're very, very fortunate to have 3 members of our community with us who have been had Peace Corps experience, and they'll share that with you, as well as other volunteer possibilities. Peace Corps has expanded, and they now actually have a medical area for people who have graduated, and for students who have graduated and now are medical professionals. So they'll elaborate on that, and I'll just have you begin, Bob. Introduce yourselves, and yeah, thank you.
So my name is Bobby. I was a Peace Corps volunteer in the African country of Chad between 2004 and 2006. And I was an education volunteer in the southern part of Chad.
My name is Alex Crowder.
Do you want the mic?
Oh,
sure.
My name is Alex Crowder, and I work, is this on?
Yes.
Okay. And I work in the School of Nursing as the project coordinator, and I served in Togo, West Africa from 2006 to 2008 as a community health and AIDS prevention volunteer.
My name is Chris. I'm a family nurse practitioner student here, and I served in the Republic of Moldova in Eastern Europe, and I was a health education volunteer.
So before we talk about our own experience in the service we had in our countries, we're going to talk a little bit about the background of the Peace Corps, and then, as I said, move on to our own experiences. Let me explain the mission that we are doing for the Peace Corps, okay, to help other countries, usually developing nations, that have interested people that are looking for help from the U.S. Peace Corps is a U.S. governmental organization, though it does function somewhat like a non-governmental organization. So part of the point there is you work with the people in the host country. We're also trying to promote an understanding of the U.S. And be sort of diplomats going over there and trying to portray ourselves in a worldly view. And the third mission of the Peace Corps is what we're doing here. Alex, Chris, and I are coming back with what we've learned and what we've experienced over there through our Peace Corps service and giving it to people here in the U.S. For a better understanding of what goes on over in the other countries where we serve.
So I'm just going to give a brief background of how the Peace Corps came to be. And it was established in 1961 under President John F. Kennedy. And one of the first time the idea of Peace Corps was really publicized was actually in 1960 when the then senator gave a speech at University of Michigan and challenged students to kind of think outside themselves and see if they would be willing to devote 2 years of their lives in developing countries. And it was just a few months after President Kennedy was elected in that he started the Peace Corps as a pilot program. And Sergeant Schreiber was appointed to be the first Peace Corps director in 1961. And to date, Peace Corps has had 215,000 volunteers and trainees, and Peace Corps has served in 139 countries. Feel free to stop me if you have any questions along the way. So I'm going to talk a little bit about my experience. And as I mentioned, I was in Togo, which is in West Africa. It's a very small French-speaking country, and it's located right next to Ghana. And I was there from 2006 to 2008, and I lived in this very small village called Pesere. And kind of the way it works, at least in my country, is when you sign up for the Peace Corps, you go over with your group. I went over with a group of healthcare volunteers, and we lived for 3 months in a village. and we lived with host families, and we learned about the Togolese culture, and we learned about the things that we were to be sharing with our communities once we got our post. So after training for 3 months, I was sent to Pesare, which was in the north, and I lived there for 2 years. And the village did not have electricity, and the water was pretty limited. Most people got their water from wells, and I lived in a compound that luckily had a spigot, so it was a very different lifestyle. And I worked on many projects related to health, and if you let me, I could talk about this for hours, but I'm going to keep it brief. And one of the projects I worked on was a girls' club. I had a club at a local middle school. It was for after school, and I worked with middle school girls on life skills. We talked about business development, and we talked about health, and things like that, and just to have a positive environment for them to come to after school. Another thing I worked on was at the local hospital or dispensary, and I helped with the wellness checkups for kids, and I talked to the moms about nutrition and the importance of breastfeeding and things like that. And I also worked with the local water committees, and we worked on the creation of wells, about 3 wells in the village during my time there. So taking a look at my pictures, the top left, that's me working with my girls' club. We were making lotion. I don't know what we were melting, but we were melting something for the lotion in that picture. And then the picture just to the right of that is me with the girls with our finished product. And the idea was that that was something that they could sell at the local markets. To the right of that, that's a picture of me during my training. I lived with a wonderful family who loaned me their clothes and did my hair. It was really a really wonderful experience, and it was really wonderful that they would have me in their home for that long. And then to the right of that, that was in Pesare. That was my host mom there, and that was the compound where I lived. And moving down to the bottom, the very left picture, that's me in front of the dispensary, and it was our hospital of sorts in the village. And if you move to the right, those are pictures of the inside. So the picture with the chairs, that is one of the checkup rooms. And behind the curtain, there's an examination table, and that's where people would go for their health checkups. To the right of that, that is a scale for babies. So we would stick the babies in that scale for their wellness checkups. And to the right of that is a birthing table in the dispensary. So it was really an interesting experience for me to see the different facilities that the folks in Pesare went to for health services. And you know, as Bobby and Chris and I were talking about the things we wanted to share, to kind of keep it brief, we were talking about our greatest surprises and challenges, and what we took away from those, and what we apply to our personal life, our student life, and our work life, and also what we want others in the healthcare field to know about our experience in the Peace Corps. And I thought about this for a long time, what challenges I could share with you, and there's a lot I could share, but kind of getting to like the meat of it, to be very honest, my biggest challenge was really working effectively in a culture that wasn't my own, and being able to communicate with people from another culture and say what I needed to say effectively and live there effectively. And kind of coming to different situations with the mantra of being curious and not furious. And when things didn't happen the way that I expected them to happen, or if I was offended by something that was not offensive to someone in the Togolese culture. And I'll give you an example of that. In Togo, what's very common is if someone doesn't know your name, they'll call you by how they see you. So if they see an older man, they can say old man. If they saw me, they would call me white lady, or they'd call me fat lady. And when I first got there, I was horrified. And I could not have a conversation with someone without getting upset, and I couldn't get my message across. I couldn't talk to the people that I was meant to work with and get the job done that I needed to get done because I was so distracted by how I was feeling in that moment and how offended I was, or my feelings were hurt. And I had days where I would go home and cry. I had days where I could laugh it off. By the end of the 2 years, it was like no big deal. It was fine. But that was a really big challenge for me. And what I took away from that is really understanding that when I go into situations, whether it's in my own culture or other countries, just realizing that I'm looking at situations through my own lens. And my lens is not necessarily the lens that is shared by the other people involved in the situation. And there's more than one right way of doing things, and more than one right way of understanding a situation. So it's really helped me that, having to go through that and deal with that has helped me in, I think, my work life, just to take a step back and just kind of think about where other people are coming from before I have like a knee-jerk reaction about a given type of situation. And one thing that really surprised me about my time in Peace Corps was really the connections I was able to make with the folks in my village. I went to Pesare and I went to Togo thinking that I would make friendships, but I don't think I realized how deeply they would really affect me, and how in the end, my friends that I worked with at the school and that I socialized with at the market, they really became my friends, and they were really human, and I was really human to them, and they took care of me. And what I think about in my experience is that when you go into a situation later, in life, like beyond the Peace Corps, I kind of think back to those times, and I try and just remember that with every situation when I'm working with other people, that we are all really just human. And it doesn't matter if you're a doctor and a patient or a student, an administrator, whatever, you just have to kind of remember that we all really are the same. And that was one of the biggest surprises, I think, that I took from Peace Corps. So if anyone has any questions, I'm happy to answer them now, or we can hold them to the end. Otherwise, I'm going to pass the mic over to Bobby.
Well, not to be redundant, but that would be I would share that challenge. The biggest challenge doing my service was having to work within a different culture. Culture, which I didn't realize until I went over there, is not innate, but it's something you have to build up throughout the years, and then it becomes very natural. And when you're in somebody else's culture, as Alex said, you get their perspective, but it's hard for them to get your perspective. So the Peace Corps really tries to promote an understanding of this, though, in training. There's a lot of cross-cultural training, and most of the trainers are host country nationals, the people of the country. And most of the staff in the office in country, at least in Chad, were Chadians. So this really helps. And so I was an education volunteer. I taught English as a foreign language in high school. And the Chadians learn differently than we do here. One very extreme example is when you're giving an exam, the students first of all, are cramped together. They're all on one bench and they're right next to each other. And so you're giving this exam, there's like 100 students in the room, they're all cramped together, and you're trying to survey all this. The temptation is there to kind of look over and say, what are you writing there, and what are you writing over there? But it's even more than that. They're willing to share with each other. So we call that cheating here. But to them, it's not really cheating. You could say that it's something in their culture, but cheating is not in their culture. So the point here is that the difference in their culture is it's very group-oriented. You identify with the group a lot more than you do with the individual as we do here. So they don't see it as cheating so much as sharing. So sharing is a big part of their culture. And sharing is great, but it kind of defeats the purpose of the exam. It's also very, very exhausting to have to police 100 kids and find out who's cheating over here, then somebody's cheating over there. I never got the hang of it. But yeah, that perspective was a challenge. So let's see. So the middle picture at the top is me in front of the high school with a couple other instructors. That's in the town Kumra where I had my service. To the left of that, the first picture is where I had my training in a village called Darda up in the north of Chad, and that's my host family there. Moving along, past on the last picture on the top is where I got my food. This is an open market, and this is where usually people, there's not a grocery store there. You have to go there, and this takes time to do. And when I've got, classes, I guess education volunteer is different. You've got the advantage of somewhere to go every day, whereas I think their section was really hard. They had to start from the base and build something up, where I had somewhere to go every day. Let's see. But I had to take time to do my own laundry or find someone to do it, or find food. And going on, there's a corner market up there, unfortunately smoking. Well, smoking is that's what the umbrella is. That's he's selling cigarettes. But that's a friend of mine, someone in the neighborhood who has a little shop. The picture next to that is the most important person in the world, and that's the guy who brought my water. So there was the closest faucet was about 100 meters, 500 meters up the road. So his job, that was DJ, and he filled those jugs and would deliver them to people in the neighborhood. It's a terrible thing. I never realized how terrible it is not to have water. And sometimes there just wasn't any. What he would do, he'd take the jugs, put it in that oil can, and that was the water supply in my compound. So I lived in a compound with a carpenter, a midwife, and a driver for an NGO. And next to that, the last picture is in the north of Chad. That's by Darda. And the reason I put this picture up is because you can see the difference. There was a big difference between north and south, and this kind of goes back to what I was talking about, how we identify with groups. And so the women in the last picture are more northern, more of a Muslim culture, and the top picture in the middle, those are women from the south. You see, they don't cover their heads, they wear heels, and so that just kind of gives you a different perspective of what goes on there. Yeah, and I could talk on a lot about things, but I think Alex made some shared points with all this, so I'd like to pass it on to Chris.
I was a health education volunteer in the Republic of Moldova, and for those of you that don't know where Moldova is, it's a small landlocked country between Romania and Ukraine in Eastern Europe. Unfortunately, it's known for being the poorest country in Europe, and also for being the country that consumes more alcohol per capita than any other country in the world. So although I could probably agree with the latter statement, the people there are probably some of the most hospitable and just resilient people I've ever known. And with Peace Corps, because you're living in a country for 2 years, you really get, you become part of the community, and that's their whole thing about being integrated there. And I think that whole setup is what makes this type of service very fulfilling, but also successful. Moldova used to be a Soviet country, part of the Soviet Union. It's kind of interesting because, growing up here in the U.S., you hear about the Soviets and how bad and evil they were and everything like that. But going there and talking to people, you really start to think outside of the box, and maybe, especially with the older generation, because for them, at least in Moldova, it was kind of like their golden era, because it's a very strong agriculture society. So they actually provided a lot of food and sustenance for the rest of the Soviet Union. So during that time, at least for them, they did really well. But like Bobby was saying, as a Peace Corps volunteer, you're kind of like an unofficial diplomat or unofficial ambassador. So you're representing your country. And I remember one of the times I had lunch with my neighbor, and of course we had a glass of wine, because that's what you do. And everyone makes their own house wine. And I came to find out that my neighbor was actually a mariner in the Soviet Marines, and he was in the Gulf of Mexico during the Cuban Missile Crisis. and he was talking about how Americans were like flying over in their helicopters and they were flipping each other off, and they were like flipping them back off and everything. It was just the height of the Cold War. And it was kind of weird to think about that, 40, almost 50 years had passed, and here we were, an American and, someone who used to be part of the Soviet Union, sitting and having a glass of wine. And it was kind of one of those surreal moments when you realize, like, how much the world can change and how important it is to kind of focus on those, like, individual relationships that you have. So, like, for me, I was pretty naive in my early 20s going to Peace Corps. I was like, oh, I'm going to change this village and I'm going to be a great health educator. I'm going to teach them all these things. But you kind of have to bring yourself back down and be a little more realistic and kind of focus on the individual relationships you make. And I think for me, entering this healthcare field, it's a really important concept to have because, you can go in with the right reasons, but you really have to have measurable and attainable goals, and you work slowly towards that. So I realized that very early on in my my Peace Corps service. So as a health education volunteer, I taught at a local school. I developed some lesson plans with the school psychologist, and we taught together. So Peace Corps is huge on sustainability. So all the projects that we do, we really want to leave them behind for the other people because we're helping, host country nationals kind of help themselves. And so we developed a lot of, what we would think is simple health education topics like, brushing your teeth and washing your hands and eating a proper diet and all this stuff that I think we kind of take for granted here in America because most of us kind of know these things. But over in a lot of developing countries, they either don't have the resources or don't have the health knowledge there. So the bottom left picture there is me dressed up as a tooth, as I did a oral hygiene play with my health club for first graders. So that was a kind of a cool thing. And I actually recently went back last October to Moldova and followed up with my partner teacher, and she's actually using a lot of the lesson plans and things. So that was kind of nice to hear. And then some of the other projects I had a sports camp, so on the bottom right I was teaching the kids how to play baseball. And then my uncle, who was a soccer coach, they donated some soccer uniforms, so the top right picture is that. The one to the left of that is me drinking some host wine with my mom in the cellar, but in Moldova it's called the Betch, which is probably the most dangerous place in Moldova just because people are very proud of their home house wine, and they say you have to try it in each one of the barrels, and some people have a lot of barrels, so it can be kind of tough climbing out of those. And then the picture to the left there is me playing guitar with my my first host mom. So like Alex was saying, Peace Corps it's about 3 months, or 10 weeks to 3 months, that you go in there, you get trained to learn the language, learn the culture and things. And I remember that was actually the second day I was in my training village, and I didn't know any Romanian at the time, and so I remember her, like, she was showing me her house, and I could kind of imagine she was saying, this is the kitchen, this is the bathroom, this is where your bedroom's gonna be. And I was just like, da, 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 like that. And then I realized that she was actually a music teacher, and I brought my guitar with me, and it was kind of a cool moment where we both knew the language of music, and so that's how we were able to communicate. So after going over the song together, we were able to perform it together at our opening ceremony before when we arrived to the village. So it was kind of cool because, again, you make those individual connections, and maybe sometimes you're not able to communicate, but you find different ways through music or alcohol and food, because everyone enjoys that. So there's different ways to relate to people, and again, like what Alex was saying about just the humanity of everybody. When you travel, you really see the similarities of people, because obviously there's a lot of cultural differences and things like that, but you really recognize that everyone here on this planet has similar hopes and dreams and desires, and you kind of feel that interconnectedness when you realize how similar people are. So I think Peace Corps creates a really good opportunity for you to experience that. And after you live somewhere for 2 years, it really starts to feel like home. When I went back this last October, I felt like I was going back home. And the people there really become like family. So overall, I mean, it's a very challenging experience. I mean, typically you're deprived of a lot of the amenities that you have here in this country, but you really appreciate it more. Like anytime I can go and drink potable water from a tap, it's like my favorite thing in the world. Because I would have to, distill my water that would take like 4 hours, and it was a very tedious process. So things like that, or just showering, especially warm showers, because showering out of a bucket or bathing out of a bucket in the middle of winter is not a fun thing. It's not. We're lucky here to have a lot of these things, and when you deprive yourself of them, it really puts things into perspective. So we'll take questions at the end, but I just wanted to talk a little bit about some opportunities that Peace Corps has for those of us at SMU. So we did Peace Corps after our undergrad, and traditionally Peace Corps is that type of setup where you have younger people with bachelor's degrees going and serving in different areas. So there's English, health education, there's agriculture volunteers. Depending on your background, you're able to do that, and a lot of older volunteers go as well. But they actually have other opportunities for people based on their skill set. So the one on the bottom is a Peace Corps response, which traditionally has been just for Peace Corps, returned Peace Corps volunteers like ourselves. So we could go and sign up and do another year somewhere. And it's a Peace Corps experience that's less supported. So for us, I'm sure with all the resources we had in terms of our Peace Corps office and health workers and things, we never felt abandoned. But with the Peace Corps response, it's a little more of Peace Corps maybe back in the 1960s, where they basically just dropped you off and you just kind of had to make it work on your own. So there is the Peace Corps support, it's less so because you're more of a professional. So they actually just recently opened it up, not just for returned Peace Corps volunteers, but also for people that have 10 years of professional experience. And I was looking at some of the opportunities they have, because a lot of it's engineering and things like that, but they also have things for physical therapy, occupational therapy, depending on the need of the country. But you're more independent in terms of how you're working compared to when we were serving. So that's one opportunity with the Peace Corps. And then also there's Global Health Service Partnership, which is a pretty new opportunity at Peace Corps. It actually started in 2012, and they've sent about 31 nurses and doctors to 3 African countries. And basically, you're able to go and help these countries develop a lot of their health education. So for those of you that are interested in going and teaching, I think it's a cool opportunity to go and work in these places and kind of teach people what we've learned, going to a good health sciences university and with some experience. So right now it's opened up just for I believe doctors and nurses with master's degrees or higher, but it sounds like it's growing quite a bit. So it's kind of nice because Peace Corps, I think originally they wanted to have opportunities for doctors and nurses like that back in the 60s, but it never got developed. So now that's kind of happening now, because I know a lot of people that they're like, oh, I want to do this type of work. As a Peace Corps volunteer, you might not get placed in that area. They're getting better with that, but it's better for professionals to be able to sign up for things like this. And then another opportunity is to be a Peace Corps medical contractor. So basically, with that, you would be a Peace Corps country's medical provider for all the volunteers and all the Peace Corps staff in the country. So that's something I'm looking into as a nurse practitioner, because one of my goals is to live overseas and work as an NP. And that's a good opportunity because you get the support of Peace Corps, and you're living in another country as well. So I think they're constantly hiring. It seems like they're pretty open, and because Peace Corps presently, I think there's about 70 countries. So they're in need of quite a few medical contractors.
Every day was an adventure. And I have to tell you, it was one of the most interesting experiences I've ever had.
We can go that last mile where other organizations might not be able to.
We all have a responsibility to each other, and I think we all have a part to play in creating the world that we want to have.
And it doesn't seem to matter, young or old, the age difference. People have sort of this common bond by being in this service with the Peace Corps.
Peace Corps Response recruits U.S. citizens who are returned Peace Corps volunteers or professionals with at least 10 years of experience for short-term, high-impact volunteer assignments.
I had been in the U.S. for about 3 or 4 years, and after my first Peace Corps experience in Ghana, and I wanted to work in international development, so I was looking for an opportunity to work abroad in a much more specialized setting. And Peace Corps Response fit that niche. It gave me the opportunity to go abroad for a short period of time.
Peace Corps Response is much more technical, much more specific, and is really like working as a professional in another country.
I felt like this program was a really great match for folks that are at a later point in their career. This provided an opportunity to channel that expertise and experience into a specific job in another country. I'm a licensed clinical social worker. I've been practicing or in the profession for over 25 years.
I decided to apply for Peace Corps Response because after I finished graduate school, I wanted to have more practical experience with development, especially with public health. And I also wanted to get more experience specifically in Africa, and I wanted to be in Southern Africa.
Peace Corps Response assignment areas are in health and HIV/AIDS, education, disaster preparedness and response, youth, NGO development, agriculture, and environment. In addition, Peace Corps Response recruits doctors, nurses, and other trained health professionals. Our volunteers are highly skilled and possess the flexibility and passion for service needed to excel in their assignments.
So my responsibilities at Bahay Tuluyan involve the goat herd here and developing a milk processing system. So I'm working with the staff and the children on some capacity building, teaching them basic animal husbandry skills along with how to pasteurize milk.
My main responsibility was to come in and do an assessment of the youth group that they have here, which would consist of us meeting on a weekly basis, making some positive out-of-school activities for the kids and broadening their horizons a bit.
Well, I was initially assigned to work with the county education director. It's all been associated with education in one way or another, which is my background. The major activities, there was working in a teacher education training workshop for bush teachers, about 150 teachers that were currently teaching in the bush but were uncertified.
One of my main responsibilities as District HIV and AIDS Technical Advisor is helping to coordinate the district response to HIV and AIDS in Malawi. There's a national AIDS framework, and then all of the districts are responsible for creating development plans to go along with that framework, but then also to look at the reality of the situation in their district.
Peace Corps Response applicants can apply to specific positions in a country of their choice. The online application generally takes less than a half hour to complete. Once accepted, volunteers can expect to be in their country of service within 3 to 6 months.
I had actually been interested in the Peace Corps for some time, and there was actually a presentation by someone from Peace Corps, and they were doing just general recruiting. But when he was there, he also mentioned that Peace Corps was in development of this new program for older folks that had more technical expertise, and that they anticipated launching it at some point in the future.
The Peace Corps Response application seemed a lot more like a normal job application because the specific job description was right there online and you applied directly to that position.
When I found myself looking for something to do next, I contacted Washington and I said, what do I have to do to apply for Peace Corps Response? And we started the process, and I'm here now. It happened faster than I thought.
Peace Corps Response offers many benefits while you are volunteering to make certain your living and healthcare needs are covered. And we also help with your transition home. For a complete listing of benefits and available positions, visit our website at www.peacecorps.gov/response.
Before I entered the Peace Corps, I didn't really have any set career goals ahead of me. Given my experience now as both a PCV and a PCRV with the Millennium Challenge Corporation, The Peace Corps has actually helped me define my career objectives and shown me the path that I want to take in my life.
I wanted to do Peace Corps also to have another experience and also realize it's a reputable organization, and to have this on my resume and have had 6 months experience living and working overseas can help me in the future.
I didn't get involved in Peace Corps response until a former volunteer and a recent Peace Corps response person told me about it. I'm telling all of my friends that are former volunteers to look at it more than just going away for 3 or 6 months. It's a chance to return to something we enjoyed, and it's a chance to gain more insight into yourself and other cultures.
Make a difference. Apply now.
Right. Does anybody have any questions? Yeah.
You mentioned wanting to do the medical contractor, but I've looked into it also. You have a little experience. Are you going to try to go directly, or are you going to try to do something here?
No, I'll probably do some clinical experience first, and then some loan forgiveness. But I think it didn't say on the website. I know for like I think it might be 3 years. Yeah, 3 years. Yeah, and then it is open for PAs as well. So, anybody else?
A question. Did you all become fluent in the language of the country? I mean, were you immersed in it beforehand and then?
Yeah, so like for me, I learned Romanian in 10 weeks, which is kind of a crazy concept, but I knew Spanish beforehand, so that kind of helped because they're both Latin-based languages. But I think it helps because you're there living it, and you either speak it or you don't find the bathroom. So you learn really fast. And then,
well, Togo is a French-speaking country, and I studied French in college, so I luckily had that advantage going into it. And I attempted to learn some local language. There were 2 main local languages, and I could kind of say like, oh, I'm going to the market or I'm going to work, but couldn't really have a deep conversation in the local tongue.
Yeah, I would agree with that. So Chad is 2 official languages are Arabic and French, and when you're immersed in it, like Chris said, you get sink or swim. I mean, if you want to eat, you got to learn how to ask for food. So it's actually a lot easier that way. And also one thing with the Peace Corps is you have a lot of time too, and people have a lot of time to sit with you, and they're flattered if you want to learn the local language. So
anybody else?
Has anyone else done a volunteer experience here of some kind? Like medical missions? Wow. Okay.
There are some medical missions coming up, or medical trips coming up this year too, so if you guys are interested, I'm happy to answer any questions about that too.
Yeah, Chris is president of the International,
International Healthcare Club, so we're planning on going back to Panama twice this year, maybe to Cuba, and possibly the Philippines, so some opportunities this year.
Anyway, and I'd appreciate you filling out an evaluation form for the presentation. Any ideas you might have? Other question? Oh, sorry.
I get real excited on Jeopardy when the geography, because I'm pretty good at geography, but I really have to say, I really don't know that I probably wouldn't be able to pick out any of your countries on a map, thing. So, but anyway, so I'm sort of just interested. How did each of you travel to your country? Like you would San Francisco, Amsterdam.
Yeah, for me, I think it was like SFO. I had my training in Philly, and then from Philly we flew to Amsterdam, and then to Turkey, and then to Moldova.
And then I also met in Philadelphia. I think we all start there. That's the starting point. And then I flew to Paris, and then Paris to Togo.
It would be the same thing with pretty much all Air France.
Chad?
Yeah, I went to Chad. Air France takes people into.
So into Paris and then Paris, Chad.
So you need to have a 4-year degree course or undergrad before you start volunteering, or?
I think there have been some older volunteers that didn't, but typically it's traditional you do it after college. I'm sure if you were to do it as a professional with 10 years of experience, like Peace Corps response, depending on your background, you could be able to do it that way too.
possible.
I would say Peace Corps is really good about doing things on a case-by-case basis. You know, they'll kind of give guidelines, but you see a lot of different things and a lot of different people who are accepted.
Not in your training site, but in your more permanent sites, did you all have internet access? How did you keep your mother sure that you were
So
safe?
I did, and my mother's quite the worrier. So I had DSL internet in my home, so it's kind of interesting to think because Moldova, so in Eastern Europe, because amenity-wise, I think I was a little more comfortable than they probably were, at least except for the winter. Winter was horrible, but so yeah, I had DSL internet, so it's kind of weird to think about like a Peace Corps volunteer in 2007 compared to a Peace Corps volunteer in 1963, where a letter would take, you know, a couple months to get places. So a much different experience, and you know, technology is kind of making it a little bit easier, so you can Skype and you know, communicate with people a lot faster.
I did not have internet access. The closest internet to me was about 45 kilometers away, and I would go into the largest city in the north called Kara about once a week or once every 2 weeks, and it would take a while to get there, and I'd go to an internet cafe and work with what they had there.
I did not have internet access. There was no electricity or running water in the town of Shannon. After about a year, the company Celltel did come in and put up a tower, so the cell phones were accessible. But normally just mail truck every 6 or 8 weeks.
Wow.
Imagine.
Did you have family or friends visit you at all?
For me, Chad is a country that's very hard to get into and hard to get out of. I wouldn't do that to my mother.
Okay.
I love it.
I did do it to my mother. She came back with me. I didn't want her to travel there on her own, so I went home for the second Christmas I was there, and she came back with me, and she stayed for about 2 weeks, and that was a really neat experience because she could visualize everything I'd been talking about.
And no one visited me, but I think I came home one summer. And don't forget, there's some Peace Corps swag over there if you guys want some information and pens and stickers and stuff. Thank you everyone for coming.
Thank you very much.